Tarkir Dragonstorm releases on April 11th, 2025, and while the set is designed for standard, there are some commander bangers to be found. My name is Nathan, you're watching the Salty Productions YouTube channel. If you enjoy this type of content, leave a like on the video and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you want to check out any of my other card evaluation videos in the other monocolors, and we'll do one multicolored video, you can check those links down in the description below. Our first card here is Anok Strike Leader, which does a pretty good impression of Adeline Resplendent Cathar. This thing makes tokens as long as we have our commander on the battlefield and for one less mana. Now, it doesn't come with the power that Adeline has. She does have a star for body, which is very nice, but Anok itself does not need to attack as well, and it does come with the sacrifice clause to protect your creature tokens. I really like this card in Ishin Two Heavens as one. Ishin really wants something to play on turn 2 if you plan on running your commander out right away. It really just wants to start making tokens as soon as it can. My particular Ishin build does stray in the token generation direction, so I will certainly be adding Anok Strike Leader to my Ishin deck, and I would also consider this in any sort of dog tribal Rin and Siri deck. It does also have that warrior typing if you care about making goblin tokens in your warrior deck, which may be a little bit more niche, but hey, I guess beggars can't be choosers when it comes to massive token generators. The next card here is Voice of Victory, which is going to be the same mana cost as Grand Abolisher and does a pretty good impression of Grand Abolisher, except that it is one less pip, but it doesn't care, or it doesn't turn off, rather, the activated abilities of artifacts, creatures, and enchantments, which can matter. It does have the Mobilize 2, which I think is pretty amazing. I guess the question would be, how much are you planning on attacking with this? So it does have a little bit more attack synergy than Grand Abolisher, but I could definitely see running Voice of Victory in any deck that really wants to protect its combo or protect its Alpha Strike pieces to turn off spell casting during your turn. So even though it doesn't turn off those activated abilities, I still think it's a wide enough utility by turning off spells that you could definitely run this alongside Grand Abolisher in most places where you would run a Grand Abolisher anyway. And of course, if you care about those warrior tokens dying, then Sturgo Stormrender would really like this card. I would definitely include it in a Zurgo deck. Maybe it's in the precon, I don't actually know, didn't look that up, but Voice of Victory, definitely an interesting card, and I do like the fact that it has 3 toughness, so it's a bit of a better blocker in the early game. Then our next card is Aligned Heart, which looks a lot like Quarry Steel Cutter, except that Aligned Heart will give you more value throughout the course of the game. You would definitely consider this in any sort of Jeskai Spellslinger deck because those monk creature tokens with prowess can get absolutely massive. The problem is that it is 1 more mana over Quarry Steel Cutter, so personally when I was building my Elsha Threefold Master list, which you can actually check out, linked down below as well, I included the Quarry Steel Cutter because the deck really wants to cash Elsha on 3 and then start making tokens. So the problem there is it's just awkward if you do have a 3 CMC commander, but if you are in any sort of Jeskai Spellslinger deck, maybe the new Narset, and you have an open turn to play this 3 mana spell anyway, then maybe Aligned Heart would go great with the new Narset as well. It just sort of depends on your mana curve and what you plan on doing in the early game, but there's no denying that this will give you great value over the course of the game, provided that it can stick around. And if you happen to have, I guess, proliferate cantrips or proliferate shenanigans, then Aligned Heart will serve you even greater. And then our next card is Anafenza Unyielding Lineage. 3 mana 2/2, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, she endures 2, and that basically means that we'll always be making that 2/2 white spirit creature token. In Aristocrat strategies, these types of cards are so clutch. This card does a pretty good impression of a Luminous Broodmoth for 1 less mana, and would fit into a Hofri Ghostforge style of deck, where you're looking to sacrifice something and possibly sacrifice it twice. The power of Wilhelt Rotcleaver, for example, which is a zombie deck that I have, is that it's great in Aristocrat shells because it effectively makes you a zombie when a zombie dies, and then you can sack that zombie again. So you get double your Ashnod's Altar triggers, or Altar of Dementia triggers, or Phyrexian Altar triggers. Basically, it just allows you to sack things twice, and let alone if you're doubling the sack effects as well with something like a Teysa. I can't remember the exact name of the card, but I'll have that on screen. So Aristocrats decks just love these types of effects, and I can definitely see this making its way into an Aristocrat shell, especially because it has flash, so that you can hold this up, hold up your removal, and if you don't have to use your removal, you flash this in on your opponent's end step and go to town from there. So pretty great card here with Anafenza Unyielding Lineage. Also, if you are in Orzhov colors, then you simply run Mirkwood Bats with this card. You can see Anafenza looks like she's covered in honey there, and that's just going to attract all kinds of Mirkwood Bats to lick that honey off of her face. So these cards are going to just be like glue in the same deck. They are so good together. But anyway, next card here is Clarion Conqueror, 3-mana 3/3 dragon with flying. Activated abilities of artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers can't be activated. That is a symmetrical effect, folks. So this is basically a damping matrix, and I also have Linvala as somewhat of a comparison here, except that the decks that are going to be running this care about its creature type being a dragon, so of course you want to put this in your dragon typal decks. Bonus points if you're running like a Sylvia Brightspear deck, which is great because Clarion Conqueror is only 3 mana, and Sylvia decks just want to spam out as many dragons as possible to go super wide with that double strike granting ability. So Clarion Conqueror is going to be a great hate piece in dragons, assuming that you are not running any artifacts or activated abilities. Then we move to Tempest Hawk, which is going to be yet another form of a deck can have any number of this card. Now, Tempest Hawk, the problem here is while it is good in theory to always tutor up another Tempest Hawk to your hand whenever you deal combat damage to a player, you are going to be searching a library forever. Like, your turns are going to take so long playing Tempest Hawk as your gimmick deck that I'd rather just have you run a Heir Apparent if I am your opponent, because at least then you are just making tokens instead of having to thumb through your deck 3, 4, 8 times on your turn. My goodness, I think that Tempest Hawk will be much less popular than like a Templar Knights deck or Heir Apparent deck just because of the shuffling that is involved. So you could shortcut it, of course, but it depends on the sequencing of your play in that case. But Tempest Hawk, fit it in any existing Heir Apparent deck, you'll be fine. All right, and that takes us to Ironwill Forger. 4 mana, 3/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, target non-legendary creature you control gains mirrored until end of turn, which looks a lot like Duke Alder Ravengard, except that, of course, we need to control our commander, and it doesn't give the haste that the Duke does, but it is 2 less mana, and I really like that. A 4-drop is so much more playable than a 6-drop. The difference between 4 and 6 mana is so huge in Commander because 6-drops are basically finishers in 2025, whereas a 4-drop, if it gets swords, you're not quite as sad, and it definitely can be played more in the mid-game, which is when it's intended to generate you value. But this thing will be used to generate just a ton of ETB effects, a ton of token shenanigans. If you run like Sundial of the Infinite, you can keep those tokens. And if you care about making double tokens, then this gets even better. So I think as long as you control your commander and you're in some sort of flicker strategy, that you can take a look at Ironwill Forger. For example, the Abdel Adrian Candlekeep Sage combo. It looks pretty good because Candlekeep Sage, of course, is an enchantment background, a little bit harder to remove. So if you are running backgrounds, this is pretty great because, of course, they count as being your commander. Then we move on to our next card here, which is Tempest Technique, 4-mana enchantment aura with Storm. Enchanted creature you control. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. Absolutely wild in any sort of Auras deck, any sort of Voltron deck that cares about targeting itself. The Orzhov commander comes to mind. I believe his name is Killian. I'll have that on screen as well. This thing is insane, but I think the value, not only does it generate a ton of power and toughness on board for you, but I think that's actually the secondary piece of value here. I think the first piece of value is in the Storm, because if you're able to cast maybe a 2-drop enchantment or perhaps a 1-drop and then a 2-drop enchantment, and then you cast this, assuming you have access to 7 mana on your turn, then it's going to trigger all of your Enchantress synergies to draw a bunch of cards. So your typical Enchantress style of decks absolutely love this. Anything that cares about enchantments entering is going to just pop off with this. And so even if it's removed, immediately disenchanted, then you have drawn at least 2 or 3 cards off of Tempest Technique entering. It's just absolutely wild. So this will, of course, go into your Enchantress decks. Not much to say beyond that. I do think you need to run a little bit of ramp in your deck, although, Selesnya, right? What Selesnya deck doesn't have ramp built in somewhere? In order to make full use of it, you really want to have access to 7, 8 mana so that you can Storm at least, I would say, 2 times to get true value off of Tempest Technique. So I do think this is appropriately costed, but you have to almost look at it as a big finisher in the late game. Great in Sithis decks. Who would have known? And then we move to Will of the Mardu. For 3 mana, we can both create a number of 1/1s equal to the number of creature target player controls, and we can have it deal damage to the target creature equal to the number of creatures we control. So this to me reads, make a crap load of tokens and remove something off the board, both of which things I'm really interested in, sort of like combining a Call the Coppercoats with a Kabira takedown all in one card. This card is incredibly efficient at what it is doing, and it is even better if you're in a Warrior Tribal deck. So of course, this is going to be just a windmill slam into Jetmir Nexus of Revels. And then also, again, if you care about Warrior Typal, then Zurgo Thunder's Decree could be an option for you as well. This card is honestly just insane, the amount of value. Of course, you need to control your commander, but when do we not control our commander in 2025 if you're not running like an insta-kill threat? Jetmir, actually, you could make the argument that Jetmir only really comes down when you're ready to win the game, and so therefore you might not actually control this at the time that you want to get both modes on it. So maybe Zurgo is actually a better example here, where we play it and then we expect to get value off of our commander. So I guess I would just make that caveat that, like, don't play this with a payoff commander in the command zone, play it with a value engine in the command zone so that you can make use of that. And of course, as I mentioned before, if you are running backgrounds, this gets even better because enchantments are hard to remove. All right, next we're going to be a bit of an auctioneer when we read Elspeth Storm Slayer. Now, in my Super Friends deck, this is how I read every Planeswalker because there's so much freaking text on these things, man. If one of our tokens will be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. +1 create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. 0 put 1/1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain flying until end of turn. -3 destroy target creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or greater. Pro tip: if you run a Super Friends deck, just pass the card to your opponents to read and tell them generally what you're going to use it for. I hate reading Planeswalkers. Okay, well, that being said, Elspeth Stormslayer is an insane new addition to our token doubling repertoire. Simply put, almost every token creation strategy wants a doubling effect in its 99 somewhere. Anointed Procession itself is like a $50 card at this point in time, just kind of ludicrous, so it's really nice that we have another option here. So Elspeth has some good things and some bad things. Good, first of all, is Planeswalkers are harder to remove for spell casts. So there's not a lot of spells that just go, swords your Planeswalker. It's a little bit harder to remove in terms of targeted interaction. However, it is easier to remove via creatures, but then we need to talk about the fact that it does make token blockers for itself. And generally, when it comes to the best Planeswalkers in Commander, it comes down to either Planeswalkers that you're willing to activate as a sorcery, and then anything on top of that is gravy, or Planeswalkers that are able to defend themselves somehow, and Elspeth does fall into that second camp. So it's a little bit hard to evaluate here, because while she does make blockers for herself, and I guess if we could assume that you're also going to automatically be in a token strategy, she's always going to be pretty well protected. That being said, she is 5 mana, which is 1 more than Anointed Procession, and 5 mana for a somewhat clunky card that will only make 2/1/1s the turn it comes down is a little bit of an interesting proposition there. I will say her 0 is pretty good if you don't need the tokens. It also functions as evasion and a quote-unquote overrun. If you happen to have any sort of counter manipulation in your strategy, then it gets even better, and I would say this is definitely a windmill slam if you can take full advantage of the 0 ability. The -3 is okay. I guess it can function as a removal spell on top of being a big amplifier, but destroy effects are just so they're okay in 2025 Commander. They're perfectly fine is how I would describe them, actually, because a lot of creatures can be reanimated out of the graveyard, or they have indestructible, so the destroy effect is not nearly as good as a simple Swords to Plowshares. So I actually factor in kind of a heavy discount in terms of value to that -3 ability, but the fact that she does have 5 loyalty, I think most of the time, 80% of the time, you're going to activate that +1 so that she's a quote-unquote 6 loyalty Planeswalker. So defending, a 6 loyalty Planeswalker is doable, I think. People do play Elspeth Sun's Champion, and that one seems to be very much beloved by the community as well. So again, if you're in any sort of token go-wide strategy, Morel cares about soldiers, which is even better. This is just total windmill slam into Soldier Tribal, which I have represented here as well with Commander Mustard, which is a little bit of an unorthodox commander, but my goodness, does he look so dapper. All right, and that brings us to Static Snare, and this could possibly be an honorable mention, but I wanted to keep it in the main set review. This is effectively a 1-mana flash enchantment that will exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield, so just a very cheap O-ring effect. I only mention this for Enchantress style of decks that currently run Swift Reconfiguration and On Thin Ice. On Thin Ice is, you could possibly swap On Thin Ice out for Static Snare so that you can wean yourself off of those snowlands. So Static Snare, it's whenever anything costs 1 mana and it is removal and it can draw a card in Enchantress, it's always worth just mentioning, even if it isn't like a quote-unquote staple in these types of decks. But I have once again here Sithis and Tuvasa that are going to be looking to just spam as many enchantments out as they can in order to draw a bunch of cards. So whenever you can remove something and draw a card after is very good value and at least worth mentioning here with Static Snare. Our next card is actually a popper mention. Salt Road Pack Beast is going to cost 1 less for each creature you control, and when it enters, it cantrips on a 4/3 body. So this is the 3rd common rarity in mono white creature body that we have gotten that cantrips itself, and once again, it's not doing anything broken or busted or insane. It's just a cool value piece in probably a creature go-eye deck that runs white. So I just wanted to mention a little popper mention here with Salt Road Pack Beast. And then we move to a very spicy card with Reunion of the House. For 7 mana, we get a sorcery that can reanimate any number of target creatures with total power 10 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, doing just a great impression of Nethroi Apex of Death for essentially less colors and the same mana cost. So this is, I think, possibly better than an Ascend from Avernus type of effect in specifically a Toughness Matters deck, which is where it finds itself in the Felethar Precon. I did a Precon upgrade guide. You can check that out linked down below as well if you are curious. I think that this is just an insta-slam in any sort of Toughness Matters archetype. It's arguably the first card you add, in fact, as long as you have any sort of graveyard self-mill or incidental graveyard filling that you can utilize there. But even with in a non-Toughness Matters deck, I think that this can definitely reanimate 3-4 creatures, which in 2025 Commander is enough to win you the game. So I wouldn't even consider this, very much discounted in terms of value from an Ascend from Avernus, because so many of the creatures that you can reanimate on the battlefield are going to be small guys anyway that provide just a ton of utility and value, and that's what actually propels you to the victory via resource disparity. So Reunion of the House, definitely an interesting pick, and a windmill slam into Toughness Matters. And that is our last white card that we will evaluate outside of our honorable mentions. Cards that just didn't quite make the cut in the main set review, but wanted to mention them anyway. Duty Beyond Death, 2-mana instant, requires us to sacrifice a creature, but we give our creatures +1/+1 counters and indestructible, doing a very good impression of Unbreakable Formation. So if you like Unbreakable Formation and you think you want a second version of that, if you have some sort of +1/+1 counter matter strategy going on, and you are also looking for a protection piece via that sort of dual role card, then give Duty Beyond Death a look. Then we have Starry-Eyed Skyrider. I like this because not only does it give target creature you control flying until end of turn, but it also enables all of our attacking tokens to have flying. So this looks a lot like a Bone Cairn Butcher, also a new card in the set that gives attacking tokens you have Death Touch. So I consider Death Touch just another form of evasion. But what this really is in terms of older cards is something like a Neali Sun's Vanguard, but significantly weaker because, of course, we really like Double Strike over flying in order to deal a lot more damage. So this is definitely more intended for limited, I think, but if you care about maybe a budget version of a card that will give your tokens evasion, you could give Starry-Eyed Skyrider a look as well. And that will take us to our top 3 white cards from Tarkir Dragonstorm, and if we could get a drum roll, please, we have Will of the Mardu, Anafenza Unyielding Lineage, and Elspeth Stormslayer. Will of the Mardu, just so efficient at what it does by creating tokens and removing something off the board, both things you want to be doing in any sort of token deck. Anafenza Unyielding Lineage is going to be just a solid addition to all of these sort of double sacrifice effects type of decks by creating that 2/2 spirit creature token. Also goes into Spirit Tribal, I might add, and is a soldier. So honestly, honestly not bad board protection even outside of an aristocrat strategy. And then Elspeth Stormslayer I think will actually see the most, possibly because there are so few token doubling effects in Commander, at least in mono white, and so to have just another addition to that toolbox of amplifiers is going to be absolutely excellent, and people are going to snap this up. So that is my white Tarkir Dragonstorm set review. If you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe, and check out my Patreon link down below. I'd really appreciate it. And with that, I will wrap up the video. And of course, if you want to see all of my other colored set reviews, you can check those out on screen now.